Welcome to Lifelong Echoes, where we grow our language skills through the true lives of extraordinary people. These stories are not only about learning new words or grammar, they are about learning empathy, resilience, and the strength of the human spirit. Today, we begin the story of Nelson Mandela, a young boy who dreamed of freedom, endured great suffering, and rose to lead his nation with wisdom and grace. His story is one of courage, forgiveness, and hope, and it will guide you not only in language, but in life. Let's begin. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village called Mvezo in South Africa. His birth name was Rolihlahla, a Xhosa word meaning pulling the branch of a tree, or more playfully, troublemaker. He was born into the Thembu royal family, not of wealth, but of respected tradition. His father was a local chief and counselor to kings. He taught Nelson the values of community, decision-making, and respect for all. Nelson ran barefoot through the fields, listened to elders tell stories by firelight, and played with his friends beside rivers and trees. These early days were filled with freedom, a simple life but one rich in culture and meaning. When Nelson was about 7 years old, he began attending a small Methodist school. It was there that his teacher gave him the name Nelson. At the time, many African children were given English names at school, a common practice under colonial rule. Though he remained Rolihlahla at home, the name Nelson would stay with him throughout his life. He loved learning. Books became his window to the wider world. He was especially moved by stories of African heroes and global leaders who had brought justice through peaceful means. He dreamed of becoming one of them, not for fame, but to serve his people. Nelson continued his studies, eventually attending Healdtown, a respected boarding school for black students. He later enrolled at the University of Fort Hare, the only university in South Africa that allowed black students at that time. It was there that his eyes were opened to the harsh realities of injustice. In his own country, black South Africans faced segregation, a system that separated people by race. They could not vote, could not move freely, and often worked difficult jobs with little protection or rights. Nelson saw this not as a law, but as a deep wrong. He began speaking with others, organizing peaceful student actions, not out of anger, but from a desire to build a better future. His leadership soon made him stand out, but when he joined a protest against university rules, he was asked to leave the school. After leaving Fort Hare, Nelson moved to Johannesburg, South Africa's largest city. There, he worked in law offices, studied at night, and eventually became one of the first black lawyers in the country. He began defending those who had no voice in the courts. But he quickly learned that true justice couldn't only be won in courtrooms, it had to be won in hearts and in laws. He joined the African National Congress, ANC, a group working peacefully to protect the rights of black South Africans. Together with other young leaders, he helped form the ANC Youth League, bringing new energy to the movement. They believed in peaceful protest, respect for all people, a future where everyone could vote, learn, and live freely. Nelson's voice was growing, and the government noticed. In 1948, a new system of law was introduced in South Africa. It was called apartheid, a word meaning separateness in Afrikaans. Under apartheid, people were divided by race, where you could live, whom you could marry, what job you could do, all was controlled. White South Africans, though a minority, held nearly all political and economic power. Nelson Mandela knew this system was wrong. He believed all people, regardless of race, deserved dignity, education, and freedom. He organized peaceful marches, gave speeches, and helped lead campaigns to change the system. But the more he spoke, the more the government tried to silence him. He was arrested, watched, followed. Yet still he stood firm. He once said, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society. It is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." As peaceful protests were shut down, Mandela and his companions faced a difficult choice. They had always believed in nonviolence, but with every peaceful action crushed, many wondered, what now? In 1961, Mandela helped form a secret group to protest against apartheid more forcefully, still without harming people, but using stronger forms of resistance. He traveled in disguise, moved quietly, and used hidden communication. The government called him a threat. In 1962, he was arrested and put on trial for conspiracy and attempting to overthrow the state. At his famous trial, Mandela stood before the court and said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities." The court sentenced him to life in prison, and so began 27 long years behind bars. Mandela was sent to Robben Island, a small, cold prison off the coast of South Africa. The days were hard. He woke before sunrise, worked breaking stones under the hot sun, slept on a thin mat in a tiny cell. He was not allowed to see his children. He could only receive a few letters each year, and his name was rarely spoken. The government tried to erase him from public memory. But even in silence, Mandela kept learning. He read, he wrote, he thought deeply. And inside that prison, he became not just a protester, but a future leader. He spoke respectfully to his guards. He encouraged peace among prisoners. He believed that forgiveness would be stronger than fear. Nelson Mandela's early life was filled with promise and pain. He went from barefoot boy in a small village to bold young leader in a divided nation, to prisoner on an island far from home. But through it all, he never gave up on a simple, powerful dream, that all people of all colors could live as equals, with dignity, justice, and peace. As you learn English through his story, remember, you are not just learning to speak. You are learning to stand, to listen, to grow, and to believe that even in silence, your heart can still carry a dream. Nelson Mandela remained in prison for 27 years, 18 of them on Robben Island, then the rest in 2 other prisons. He worked during the day, and at night he studied law. He memorized poetry, wrote secret letters, and mentored younger prisoners. Despite the harsh treatment, Mandela always treated his jailers with respect. He believed that dignity could soften even the hardest hearts. In time, the prison guards began to admire him, not because of his power, but because of his peace. He didn't shout. He didn't hate. He stood quietly and firmly for justice and unity. Outside the prison, the world was changing. More and more people were learning his name. They marched, sang, and wore shirts that read, "Free Nelson Mandela." His spirit had not been broken. It had become stronger. By the 1980s, people across the world had joined the movement against apartheid. Countries began placing economic and political pressure on South Africa. Artists wrote songs, students held protests, leaders from every continent called for change. Inside South Africa, people continued to resist, peacefully, bravely, and at great risk. Mandela had become a symbol. Though locked behind walls, his message reached beyond them. And then, in a moment that surprised the world, change began. In 1990, South Africa's president at the time, F.W. de Klerk, announced that Nelson Mandela would soon be released. The world held its breath. And on February 11th, 1990, the gates opened. Nelson Mandela walked out of prison slowly, calmly, and with a soft smile. He held the hand of his wife Winnie and raised his fist gently in the air. People cried. They danced in the streets. News cameras from across the world captured the moment. But Mandela's first words were not about anger or revenge. They were about peace. He said, "I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people." And he reminded everyone, the time for healing has come. The man who had been imprisoned for nearly 3 decades returned to his people not with bitterness, but with forgiveness. In the years that followed, Mandela worked tirelessly to guide South Africa toward change. He met with leaders from all backgrounds, even those who had once supported apartheid. He believed in conversation, understanding, and shared purpose. He did not erase the past, but he believed that reconciliation was stronger than punishment. In 1993, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, not just for ending apartheid, but for doing it peacefully. They stood together on stage, 2 former enemies now united in hope. In 1994, South Africa held its first democratic election, where all people, regardless of race, could vote. The lines to vote stretched for miles. Some waited for hours, smiling, singing, holding children in their arms. For many, it was their first time voting, after decades of being denied that right. When the results were announced, the world celebrated. Nelson Mandela was elected President of South Africa. At the age of 75, he became the country's first black president, and its most beloved. As president, Mandela focused not on punishment, but on building a new nation. He formed a government of unity, including people of all races and backgrounds. He helped create the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where victims of apartheid could share their stories, and even those who had done harm could ask for forgiveness. It was painful, it was honest, and it helped the nation begin to heal. Mandela served only 1 term as president. He believed in leadership, but not in holding on to power. He spent his time visiting schools, supporting health programs, and encouraging peace in other countries. Wherever he went, he brought warmth, wisdom, and humility. He once said, "It is better to lead from behind and to put others in front." After stepping down from the presidency in 1999, Mandela became a global elder, a teacher and guide to the world. He spoke about peace, education, equality, and kindness. He supported causes from fighting illness to empowering children. World leaders respected him, children adored him, strangers felt close to him because he made them feel seen. He received awards, honors, and statues in his name. But Mandela always remained simple in spirit. He loved to laugh. He enjoyed wearing bright shirts. He believed in listening before speaking. He once said, "I am not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." In his final years, Mandela spent more time with his family, especially his grandchildren. He rested, he reflected, and he continued to believe in the power of hope. On December 5th, 2013, at the age of 95, Nelson Mandela passed away peacefully. The world paused. In cities around the globe, candles were lit. People gathered to remember a man who had once been imprisoned and later embraced by the world. His funeral was attended by more than 90 world leaders, but the truest tribute came from ordinary people who whispered thank you and promised to carry his dream forward. Nelson Mandela's life reminds us that strength is not in anger, but in forgiveness. That justice does not come from shouting louder, but from listening, standing, and speaking with kindness. He was not perfect, but he was patient. He was humble, and he was hopeful, even in the darkest times. As you learn English through his story, know that you are also learning how to be clear without cruelty, be strong without shouting, and grow with gentleness. Mandela showed us that even after 27 years in silence, a voice can still rise, not to divide, but to unite. He once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." So learn, grow, and carry this story, not just in your language, but in your life. If you like to listen and learn English more about stories, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Please like and share with your friends who are trying to improve their English knowledge.